Okay, so the session has begun recording. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along. For those who don't know me, my name is Kat Calvert. I'm the Workstream Lead Officer in the Waste Partnership for Wellbeing for Learning, and part of my remit is supporting learners. So today we are beginning our sessions on inclusion in mainstream. These are sessions that are very much designed for class teachers within a mainstream setting. However, I do know that we have a variety of different participants today. You are more than welcome. Just please keep in mind that these are the people that the session is aimed at. I would like to welcome along Hayley McMurray, who is a Development Officer at Education Scotland, who's going to lead the session. She is joined by Sam Nicholson, who's also coming onto the call. Sam is also an Education Officer with Education Scotland. And then finally, we have Michelle Calder, who is an Autism and Complex Needs Outreach Teacher within Perth and Kinross Council. So a mixture of I'm sure Hayley won't mind me calling her an expert, a bit of theory from the experts and a bit of the message from current practitioners as well. So welcome along everybody, and I'm going to hand over to Hayley.
Thank you very much, Kat, and thank you for such a generous introduction. I'll definitely not be calling myself an expert today. Certainly, I feel it's a journey that we're all on and we're all always learning. But hopefully today we can learn a little bit together and just continue that as a group. So you'll hear from me mostly today as the bulk of this presentation, but Michelle's very kindly joined me today from Perth and Kinross Council, just so that once I've given you a bit more of a brief overview, then Michelle can support with drilling down into more practical aspects of what that might look like for you in your classroom practice. And my colleague Sam Nicholson, good to know that you're here. You've just got a little heart from me in the chat there now that I saw your name pop up there. Sam will be joining in towards the end and potentially if there are any particular questions that come up. But also with Education Scotland, we're quite keen that we're all presenting with the same consistent messages, that nationally we're all singing from the same hymn sheet. So sometimes it's nice for us all to be here as well together in these sessions to hear each other's presentations. So my contact details are on this first slide. We will be sharing this presentation with you so that if you want to click on any of the links that we share today, then you'll have access to all of them as part of the handouts. And also if you want to follow up on anything in particular with me directly, then please do email me. So my role is a Development Officer with Education Scotland. This is a seconded role for 2 years where I have a remit specific to autism, intellectual and learning disability, and inclusive practice. So today we are taking quite a broad brush really with this session. We've got quite a short time and I know we have people representing a whole range of sectors here today. Thank you so much for putting your comments in the chat so we can see where you're coming from. That's really helpful to us and it also makes it feel a little bit more personal as well. So I know we do have colleagues as well who aren't from mainstream coming along today. Although the focus really is mostly around inclusion, hopefully there will still be a few nuggets of information that you might find helpful to explore further out with today. But really what we're hoping today in this short session is really just to start the conversation and leave you with some food for thought. The format will be a brief presentation from me with a bit of an overview and some signposting, and then Michelle will, who I'll introduce in more detail when we get to your points and give you a little bit more fanfare. Michelle will be telling us a bit more about practical approaches that are helping to support children who are autistic in mainstream settings in Perth and Kinross. And we'll have some time in breakout rooms as well for you as well, so that you can reflect on some of the things that we've been talking about and applying those thoughts to a case study. And we should hopefully, all being well, have time for questions as well towards the end. So really just to not dwell on anything around legislation and so on, but it's really important before we start just to keep in mind that there's a range of government policies and legislation that underpin the work we do around ASN, autism and inclusion, as well as various education priorities and drivers as well. So we'll leave this slide with you just so that you can refer back to it, because it's really important to know what's really underpinning the work that we do. But part of Education Scotland's work is really about supporting translation of these policies and legislation into practice, what's happening on the ground in our classrooms in Scotland. And you might have come across before as well, but another thing really to keep in mind throughout this presentation is just this concept of inclusive practice and what we call the 4 pillars there. So this is really our goal, what we're striving towards in education when it comes to inclusion. So it's really bearing in mind that we don't want children just to be present in our classrooms, but actually ensuring that they have the right supports in place to ensure that they are participating and achieving. And also, of course, being aware, I think, that some children achievement might look slightly differently for them, and that's okay. But just being aware of the individuals that we have and ensuring that all of these 4 key areas are being addressed when it comes to inclusion for them. We will be referring a little bit as well today to the Autism Toolbox, which you might be familiar with. This is our national source of information relevant to autism in Scotland, and they have a nice section here under this link to information around inclusive school communities, where you can find out more about this as well. Today's presentation will really be hanging off what we call these key messages, which are within the GTCS guidance around supporting autistic learners. There's a link to the PDF there for you to access in your own time if you'd like to read more. It can be a really useful tool as a basis for PRD discussions or reflection among staff as part of professional dialogue. But certainly there's more detail within that document. But today, just making sure that we're focusing in on these really important key messages. In Scotland, we're keen that everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet and that we're all being consistent in our messages and approaches. And the GTCS key messages can be a really helpful way of really keeping that in mind. So we're referring to each of these as we go through the presentation today. When it comes to information around autism, you might have come across this website, the Different Minds website, which has been commissioned by Scottish Government and has supported by NHS colleagues. And it's really a refreshing look at autism and busting any myths that we might have around our understanding of autism nowadays. So it's a really refreshing look at this and a really useful website if you're looking for a brief overview of information around autism. So if you are wanting to find out more, we would suggest this as a reliable source of information, along with anything coming from the National Autistic Society. We're very aware that when you Google information, there's a whole variety of information that's out there, and not all of it is reliable. So yeah, a good place to go. So along with all of this, we're just thinking about inclusion and how it sits within what we call the stage levels of intervention in Scotland. This does look different from one authority to the next sometimes about how it's implemented, but really just keeping in mind that we're looking at a basis of inclusive practice and universal support. So what we try and aim to do is focus on our learners who have any form of additional support needs, and then ensuring that there's equity of practice across the board. But then sometimes being aware that through assessment and planning for individual pupils, it might be that we need to dig a little bit deeper there and offer some more targeted supports. And that might be through involving people from outside organisations and agencies, whether that's within the authority or out with, but looking at more targeted support for individuals where we maybe need to look at a plan more closely for them. And it might be that support for any individual child can move from that universal support, which is much less intrusive, to more targeted support at times. Some of the tools that we use to support those levels of intervention in Scotland, it might vary again from one authority to another, but quite widely used is the Circle tool, which you might have come across, which is a tool that practitioners often use to support inclusive practice in different sectors. So we have Up and Away, which is often used in the early years, and then we have the primary and secondary resources. We'll have some links that are shared later on in the presentation as well, but we also have modules that support deeper learning and understanding around use of these tools. But what they do is help you make a quick snapshot assessment of a child's engagement and participation and the inclusive environment, and then you take some quick strategies and approaches that you can quite easily put into practice in your classroom setting. And just to make you aware, when it comes to more targeted support, a tool that's often being used in Scotland more and more widely now is the CERTS model. That's not something you particularly will need to know about as a mainstream class teacher, but also good to be just aware of that it might come up in conversations if you have outside organisations or agencies coming in to support. Often that's a tool that's used as a framework for assessment and planning for children who have additional support needs. Sam, I've just seen your sign there saying that you might not be able to see the presentation. Okay, is everyone else okay and able to see it? I'm assuming a thumbs up means yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just some Wi-Fi connections aren't keeping up. I think the bad weather today. Okay, I'll keep going. So this is just a little bit more information about those circle resources that I mentioned, and a quick picture just to show you what they look like if you're searching for them online. The National Autism Implementation Team, or NATE, they have lots of guidance around implementation and training on their website, and there are links there that take you through to it so that you can find out more. But very much worth looking into if you're looking for quick ideas of what you can do to support any learners in your class, or about looking generally at your classroom and how to make it more inclusive. Part of the circle framework is breaking all of this down into 4 key areas that we have on the screen here, looking at skills, motivation, environment, and structures and routine. And often, before we even think of skills, we often have to focus first of all on making sure that the environment's right. So before looking at the child and how to support them to develop skills, we need to make sure that that environment for learning is suitable to meet their needs so that they're ready for learning. So really, we need to look down at what the physical environment is doing for the child, whether it's supporting them or hindering their progress and engagement, and also the social environment. So thinking about how we are interacting with children in our classes as well. I mentioned briefly at the start there about the Autism Toolbox. Here's a link to it. So it's a source of information around autism and other relevant themes and around that, such as transitions and so on, supporting families, etc. So it's worth having a look at that too if you want to look at any specific themes around autism. That's due to be refreshed this year as well by a working group. One of the other key messages mentioned by the GCCS is the importance of providing predictability. And I think if there's one thing that you can take away today, it's really about thinking from the perspective of the child in your class who might be autistic or have a similar presentation. There may well be children in your class who don't have a diagnosis of autism, but certainly present very similarly. They may not have a diagnosis for a whole variety of reasons. So it could well be that any strategies or approaches you're putting in place in your classroom will suit other children, not just the ones who have a diagnosis. So just keeping in mind from that perspective, one of the biggest things that you can do to reduce distress, confusion, the feelings of being overwhelmed that some of our children face in mainstream classrooms is providing predictability. It seems so simple and so straightforward, but actually it's one of the biggest key things that you can do to reduce those feelings of distress. So just thinking about these questions from the perspective of the child, do they know what the plan is, what they're expected to do, how much, how long it will take, when do they know that they're finished? One key tip can often be saying to children, when the timer's finished, it's time to stop rather than it's time to finish. So there's no anxiety around that. Thinking about what happens next. But what if they're not sure? What do they do? Do they have tools or approaches that they can take to rectify those situations? So these are all quite good questions to ask yourself sometimes from the perspective of the child that you're working with. And then in a more practical sense, and Michelle's going to talk about this in more detail today to give you a more practical sense of what this might look like, but there's a whole range of tools that you can use to help make things more predictable by using visual timetables in whatever form suits the needs of the individual child that you're working with, wherever they're at developmentally, whether it's symbols or photographs or objects and so on, and using timers and so on. So these things are all quite simple things that you can take forward in your classroom to improve predictability. And as I said, ensuring that things are developmentally appropriate for our children. So just being aware that there are children who will be pre-verbal, so they might not yet be using words to communicate, or any other symbolic systems such as symbols or AAC. There might be children with emerging language where they're starting to use language, but they're not fully conversational yet. This model comes from the CERTS model that I mentioned that might be used as a more targeted framework for assessment and planning. But it's a really nice kind of overall way of seeing it from all of our perspectives, understanding that children might come at any of these 3 developmental levels when it comes to their communication. One example where this might be important is, for example, social stories. So just being aware that to engage with a social story, you need to have the ability to reflect and have more metacognitive skills to think about your thinking, and a higher level of language as well. So for a social partner and many language partners, a social story actually wouldn't be appropriate. And when it comes to visual timetables as well, for example, some children might be more able to process and understand objects than they would symbols, for example. So just being aware that another thing to be thinking about for our children is where they're at developmentally and what approaches would be suitable to meet their needs. And then also this, I suppose, links with providing predictability, but also just thinking about how for a lot of our autistic children, the day can be quite stressful, it can be confusing, it can be overwhelming, and often this leads to either children disengaging or some of the behaviours that we see that we find more challenging. And we might find children seeking ways to avoid situations that are too much for them. So it's really important to think about how we obviously need our children to be there to learn, and we need them to be engaging and participating with what's going on, but we need to make sure that we are providing a balance there. So whenever you have an activity which we know is going to be more demanding, for example, involving a lot more conversation and cooperation, it might be that that's sandwiched between more low demand activities. So just being aware when you know you're going to be pushing a child a little bit more, making sure that you're setting them up for success there. So giving them something that they prefer to do or they find more calming, and then do the activity that you know they're going to find more challenging, and then follow it with something just more calming, less demanding. And also just alongside that, just thinking about your interactions as well, and whether the child's expected to interact with you at different times. So if you're giving a more low demand activity, maybe that's a point in the day when you're stepping back a little bit and just giving them time to decompress and not be interacting with you. This diagram is a really interesting way of looking at breaks. So what I don't like about this is that it suggests that a child, if they need a break, they need to be able to ask for it. And absolutely, it is our job to be planning ahead and thinking about the child's day, how it's structured, and ensuring those breaks are built into that time. However, saying that, helping a child to become self-aware, if they're at that level and able to request a break by giving them supports, for example, cards so that they can go to their safe space or to move to a less demanding activity if they're feeling overwhelmed, can be a really helpful approach to take, especially for our conversation partners. But sometimes it can be helpful just to break things down into a flow diagram like this, just to think about how we're supporting children, and if we're not supporting them, what that can lead to. And one of the most important things is really trust. So building trust with an adult. If we put the right supports in place, then the child knows that they will get the thing that they will need, and they won't therefore be resorting to less conventional or more challenging ways of seeking out the break that they're really badly needing. So it's important to seek to understand where that distressed behaviour comes from, and actually often it comes from a place of being quite overwhelmed. So that's why it's so important to provide those breaks throughout the day. Another helpful tool for you when we're thinking about seeking to understand what's underlying some of the challenges that we see is the Autism Level Up tool and resources. So this is a whole suite of resources that they have available on their website for free to practitioners, made by Amy Laurent and Jacqueline Feedy in the US. Amy Laurent is one of the authors of the CERTS framework, which we've mentioned today as well. And Jacqueline Feedy herself is autistic, and they provide a really good collaboration really around that autistic perspective, and also research and thinking about what's about building overall understanding around autism and what supports are helpful. And one of the things here that they share is this diagram where we look at energy levels throughout the day. We find that often a lot of autistic children find it really hard to recognise and label their own emotions. And sometimes, you know, there might be some controversy around really teaching children to label emotions, because sometimes some autistic people might feel that they don't experience emotion in the same way as non-autistic people might. So there is a little bit of thinking going on at the moment around teaching emotions, and actually maybe thinking about it from the angle of where your energy levels are. And obviously, if you're focused and purposeful, you're in a good place to learn. But if you're feeling a bit more upped up and fidgety, you're maybe not quite there. We're needing something a little bit more calming before you're ready to learn. But if you're sleepy and still, you might need a little bit of a shake up and wake up. So it's another way of looking at it, really. And I think the discussion around emotions is one that we're starting to think about and talk about more. So I'm not stamping an absolute on that just now in terms of opinion about where we should be going to next. But certainly this slightly different angle that we're talking about now and thinking about is one worth considering. And then I suppose just to add into the importance of collaborative working as well, which is really difficult, I think, when you're based in a classroom and not having a huge amount of free time to link in with other organisations and agencies that might be supporting you when it comes to targeted support around individuals in your class. But certainly where possible, having all those different perspectives and parts of the jigsaw coming together and sharing those angles of thinking can be really helpful when planning for what a child needs and how to take forward supports for them. But also when it comes to collaborative working as well, working with parents and having that true partnership and being quite open and honest about the challenges you're facing, acknowledging their unique insight into their child, what their child needs, and the supports that they put in place at home can be really helpful. And having that two-way process of approaches and strategies that you found helpful in the classroom, sharing them with parents as well, and just trying to make that a really open, honest and mutual partnership. And one of the other key things to share with you, this is made by the same person who made that diagram around taking a break as well, Kristin Wiens, and she makes lots of really lovely free-to-use graphics around inclusion. And this one is just, you know, really highlighting how important you are as the strategy for the children that we're working with who are autistic. Often, you know, there are lots of debates around resources and money and what we have available to us in terms of tools and packages and how much that costs. But absolutely, one of the best tools and resources that we have at our fingertips is each one of us working directly with children and, you know, seeking to understand that child and their unique profile, considering how we interact with them and how that fits their interaction style, and the supports that we put in place. All of these things make a huge difference and are often underestimated. That's not to say it's not challenging when you're in a classroom and, you know, sometimes trying to figure out what makes a child tick and thrive, or what things might be triggers for some of our children can be really, really challenging. But actually that collaboration amongst yourselves in school, with your teams, with parents, with other organisations, there's so much value in that. So please don't let go of just how important you are and what you can bring to making a difference for that child that you have in front of you. When it comes to self-evaluation as well, this is just a useful tool that we have in Education Scotland that can just be quite simple in helping you just think about evaluating your own role, but how, you know, inclusive practice is happening in your wider school community, but also more widely as well. And just thinking about very simply what you do well, what you might want to work on, and how you might go about that. And that's something that you can do either individually on your own or with colleagues. But just quite a simple way of just evaluating where you're at and where you want to go next. And then just a brief little bit of signposting before I hand over to Michelle. For any of you who want to read up a little bit more, these are 3 of my favourite books that I've read most recently, are here, and I would recommend them very much. Uniquely Human was written by Barry Prezant, who is one of the authors of the CERTS framework, but also he has a podcast which is really inspiring and worth listening to. Sometimes that can be a little bit less draining than reading at the end of a busy day, but certainly worth a listen, and just offers a different take on autism, slightly more refreshing as well. And also Amy Laurent, who I mentioned, who was one of the CERTS authors as well, and is one of the co-authors of the Autism Level Up resources. There's a nice TED talk from her as well, which lasts about, I think, 17 minutes, and is a good watch as well. Highly recommended for the messages that she's sharing there. In terms of further professional learning from Education Scotland, so we have a suite of modules online. So there are some around the Circle framework there, primary and secondary. Alongside that, we have one around autism and inclusive practice, and also one on inclusion more generally. So they're free to use. You just need to register with the Open Learn Create website, and then you can access them and work through them in your own time, either individually or as a group. We have, with Education Scotland, around 80 professional learning activities on a whole variety of themes relevant to education. But one that's very recently been added is around an introduction to autism and inclusive practice. What's quite nice about these activities is you can work through them on your own time. They're quite sort of short bites where you can work through some signposted reading that's relevant to different themes. And you have some reflective questions that you can use to pause and think about what you've read and what you've seen, and pull that back into your own practice and think about what it means for that. So I would very much recommend the one on autism and inclusive practice if you're wanting a brief activity, but giving you a good overview. So some links here to for further information that I've mentioned throughout this session. The Autism Toolbox is there, the professional learning activity, and the modules, and the link to the full document for the GTCS professional learning guide that I mentioned, and also the tools on the Autism Implementation Team, NATE's website as well. They have a really nice evidence-based toolkit which can help you think about what approaches you might be putting in place, but ones that we know have a good basis of research around them. So going to move on now to sharing practice, before we move on to the case study. A little bit worried that they're not the slides that I want to share with you, so I might need to unshare and share again for Michelle. So
Hayley, I'm actually not able to see your slides at the moment, so can I share my presentation? And I promise to stop at slide 12 and then jump on to 19. I can't see any of your slides. It's not letting me load the presentation, but I'll try and share my part of it. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll stop sharing, and just while Michelle, you're getting yourself organised, I'll just give you a little introduction now, if that's okay. So yes. Michelle's very kindly offered to step in very last minute to share practice with us today. Part of the session, we were really keen that we had people coming from classroom-based experience where they can share a bit more about the practical approaches of what we are doing in classrooms in real life, and not just this kind of theory and overview. Michelle's really kindly offered to come along from Perth and Kinross Council, where she's working as an outreach teacher for autism and complex needs, and brings a whole wealth of experience of working with a variety of teachers in a variety of schools around inclusive practice, and has lots of ideas about what this would look like and can provide you with some suggestions for that today. Michelle, how are you feeling with your slides? Are they
okay? Can you see them?
I can't. Can you, Kat?
No. Can you see them? Can you see them now?
No, can't see.
Presenting, it's saying at the top. Sorry, we'll try again. So it's got sharing the slide, and it's the screen or the window?
Choose the window.
The window, yeah. And then down here, there. Can you see that?
No.
Oh, sorry. Right.
Right, don't worry about it.
I can see your I just try again.
There's a few people asking, just while you do that, while you fix that, I'll just have a wee quick chat. There's a few people asking if they'll get copies of the PowerPoint. That will be emailed out to you. I'll just email it to everybody on the mailing list that signed up for it. The session will also, as it's been recorded, it will be put onto the Wellbeing for Learning YouTube channel. I'll send you the link to that as well so that you can watch or share with colleagues. And Hayley was also talking about, I'll do a plug at the end of everything that's coming up for you, but Hayley was talking a lot about circle training. There is actually circle training coming from the West Partnership in conjunction with Education Scotland, and it's Pauline Lynch from the Education Scotland West Regional team who will be leading in that. And we'll be working through it in a 4-week block for primary and then a 4-week block for secondary.
Hayley, I think you'll just have to share your content. It's not letting me, and I'll just have to talk to the slides.
Yeah, don't worry at all. I think I was sharing through PowerPoint Live just there now. So actually, I've just changed which presentation I'm sharing.
Can you see that now? Can you see?
Yeah, they're my slides. Yeah, can you see those? I think I'm sharing.
I'm not sure. I can see my presentation, but yeah, that's great. I can start. Is that the beginning of it?
It is, yeah.
In line with the GTC. So thank you so much for having me today. I'm a very fortunate position to be asked to share my unique perspective on working with young people across Perth and Kinross in mainstream with autism. I can't see the slides now at all. Can you see them? Oh, sorry. I can't see.
I want us to tell you what slide number we're on, and then, or if you tell us to move forward and you look at the one that's on your screen and tell us which one to move forward to, would that work?
Yeah, I can see it now. Can you see them now? Yeah, it looks like I'm sharing, but I keep cutting off. So what we're looking at then, obviously, is the spectrum across the local authority, and within that spectrum, we've also got very high functioning young people who would have been known as Asperger's, and then of course we have young people now that are profoundly autistic in mainstream as well. We have to get the accommodation right, so we'll look at the environment obviously, and we're looking at the communication being a communication friendly environment, trying to encourage young people to foster independence, and looking at these complex individuals across the week and across the term. The relationships are key, as you will all know, and the environment is first and foremost. Can you see the slide on environment, Hayley?
Yeah.
In line with the National Autistic Society 2017, they highlighted that the sensory sensitivities of young people had to be paramount and at the forefront of our thinking. It had to be well structured, the visual environment, and minimal distractions if possible with low arousal. We need to think about these being natural colours with lots of natural light, and that's the best working conditions for our young people. Having high handles if there's a risk assessment for somebody running, that's not always possible in mainstream, and again we're having to think about noise and how that is impacting on their sensory sensitivities within the mainstream. With regard to displays, when I worked at New Struan School, which was an autistic residential school, I worked there prior to being an outreach teacher, and they was an art therapist, and she always tried to get us to think very careful about our displays, being well organised, purposeful, make sure they're informative, not just there for the adults coming into the room, but also very functional for the young people to use them throughout the day. Okay, are you on the visual slide?
Yeah.
Okay, I can't see anybody except mine. So we're looking at importance of visuals being used very functionally across the school, and also seeing that they can be used to cue young people, to help them to teach positive behaviour management. We're also looking for them to become independent. Supporting both receptive and their expressive communication. So therefore we want the visuals to be used regularly. They're not just there for show. We want them to have better executive functioning, planning, organising, memory recall, and being able to reflect on their day can also be part of the use of visuals throughout the day. The autism circle at the top is a very helpful way to think of the profile of young people. Rather than always seeing it as a spectrum, we can think of it as a wheel of autism, and the graphic at the top right highlights that. Have you got transition strategies?
Yeah.
Okay. Within the mainstream and across the course of the week and the term, we have many transitions. We've got micro transitions, which are all the very small ones from task to task, and then we have the macro transitions, which take us from one area of the school to the other, or out and about in the community. All these transitions really need to be supported for young people, to give them an opportunity to prepare for it, to plan. Using things like communication passports are very helpful to help them with transition, and especially if it's transitioning from primary to secondary or nursery to primary, which is a different environment. I've seen some classes use very successfully visual timers and music timers, but sometimes these can be a little bit over the top, and our young people with sensory processing issues can find these really tricky. It's great to give them preparation for the upcoming change that's about to take place, and there are some excellent practices being used across Perth and Kinross for transitions. I'll let you read this sensory communication quote. Olga Bogdashina writes a lot about sensory processing and how some of what we may be missing, those of us on the autism spectrum, is the ability to adjust to sensory assaults. Other people accept as normal, but we may need to have information presented to us in a very different way. So we're becoming very more attuned in Perth and Kinross about different activities we can use and why we're using them, and what it helps to support with a young person. So if they have got auditory processing difficulties, what are we trying to do throughout the day to make their life a little bit better? And this handout, which is 3 pages, is just really to highlight some of these activities that we have used across the course of the schools. Perth Autism Support and Outreach work together to identify what was the most common behaviours, and you'll recognise a lot of these within the mainstream. A lot of these are as a result of the young people having a poor or lack of theory of mind, which is when they struggle to see things from other people's perspectives or read the thoughts, feelings and intentions of others. So therefore they're swearing in class, or they're shouting out with disregard to their peers and not taken into consideration then because they're very egocentric. So a lot of the behaviours can be tricky to manage for the mainstream staff, particularly in the secondary school. We've noticed that it's hoodies are up and much more fidgeting, but they don't want to use timeout cards, so we have to find something a bit more subtle. For those of you that are aware of the anxiety curve, I've put an example on the right. The staff need to keep the regulations, so on the bottom of the curve it highlights that's the staff's regulation, and therefore when the child is becoming dysregulated or escalating in behaviour, we have to try and come across at base camp at number 3 and intervene, and then be able to de-escalate those situations. So this is just sort of common practice and really good autism practice across Perth and Kinross. This is about emotional self-regulation. I'll let you read that. It was 2006. I'm really sorry it's so outdated. Could have got something a bit more up to date.
Still very relevant though, for sure.
Ability to perceive. Pardon? or infer relevant information about what others may think, feel or intend, because their information indicates what others are likely to do. So it depends, secondly, on the ability to evaluate and modify your own behaviour in light of what we believe to be true about others, so that our behaviour towards them will be effective in achieving our social and communicative goals. So, for example, recruiting help or being accepted, and communicating a fact or attracting a male or intimidating an enemy. So it's maybe not the best example, but it kind of highlights emotional self-regulation. So across Perth and Kinross, I'm really fortunate I can get to see lots of good practice. Some of things that we're currently using consistently is the goal plan do review. We are thinking about sound bites, so young people have predictable, consistent responses, and adults who are saying the same scripts. Speech and language therapy, I always say that it's important to have these repetition through different staff. So big deal, little deal, are you ready, are you not ready? I can see you're not ready because you're under the desk. When you're ready, I'll know because you'll be sitting on your chair. Choice, no choice, and scary, not scary. These are some of the sound bites that we use across. Educational psychologists also look at action research projects across PKC to be able to embed this and give people understanding of why we use these with executive functioning sort of understanding and training. The Fix-It folder, the Superflex and Unthinkables, the Homunculi and Emotion Works are other self-regulation strategies that can be used, but more predominantly we are using 5-point scale, which can be used for volume of voice or also for anxiety or engagement. But we find that comic strip conversations we use more for reflective and restorative practice, whereas the self-regulation for the choice boards is about their calming techniques. What do I do to help me feel calm? Where can I go, and what can help me to support me to get there? So these are some of the visuals and strategies we're currently using. I'll let you read the strengths of people with autism, because sometimes we oversee this and always looking at the sort of behaviours and the challenges. They often have excellent, exceptional memories and can recall events in really fine detail. They can generally have the ability to lie or deceive. They do not generally, sorry. Some people with autism may have sort of special talents or abilities, and they used to refer to this as sort of idiot savant. They don't so much now. However, they have a very refreshingly frank point of view, and when you say to them good looking and good listening, they'll very quickly tell you if you're not good looking. So sometimes that can be quite refreshing. They have a full range of strengths and weaknesses in all their personalities, and they have often can have encyclopedic memory or photographic memory. But they have a positive contribution to family and daily life. More recently been taking lots of young people to the horse riding and bringing in therapists, and that again has been a really rewarding intervention. So how to help them. Top tips: tuning in to the pupil and to the instructions, trying to slow down the delivery. I'm sorry, this was so fast. Writing step-to-step instructions or just chunking the work for them, and check the pupil's understanding of vocabulary used or their implied meaning. As you know, young people find it really hard to infer or to have to work with sarcasm or metaphoric language. So it's important that we check their understanding of what we're saying and use the pupil's dictionary and their own words. And also allocate some timetable for talking about their favourite time. Had a young lad at a residential autistic school before Perth and Kinross who loved to talk about washing machines, and he used Makaton to speak about his washing machine. He didn't like Indesit, so if you had one of them, he really wasn't interested. But it's really important to find time to chat about their own special interests and start afresh every day, because it can be a really tough day the day before, and there can be lots of physical challenges or verbal challenges, and it's important to draw a line and start afresh the next day. Okay.
Thank you very much, Michelle.
No problem.
That was fantastic. A really good whistle-stop tour of so many really great examples of good practice that's going on in your local authority. Just for the more keen-eyed of you there who were watching through the presentation there, I think in the end it turned out that my slides were the ones that everybody was seeing, and you might have noticed that the slides were slightly out of sync there, and I very quickly whizzed through 3 slides around sensory strategies.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah, no, don't
Sorry.
worry at all, Michelle, but I was thinking we'd spoken about that, about not having them in just because we knew that we had short time, but that's something that we can come back to and share potentially as a handout or some links to information for people who might be curious to hear more. But we were also just so aware that we had only a short window of time for this today. So
thanks, Hayley. I had other slides, but Hayley asked me to cut them short, so I'm really pleased that I managed to get through them. And the other ones were more targeted, although we did mention that sort of Lego therapy being used across sort of mainstream at times now, yoga being used more generically as a universal approach, and the last one was looking at forest schools. Yeah, so they were the other 3 ones that we were going to, but we felt they were more targeted. But I'm sure some of our colleagues are using some very creative, bespoke packages for our young people. So thank you.
Okay, well, we'll just move on now, everybody. Thank you for your time and for listening. I know that's a lot of listening to take on board. So what we really want to do now is give you an opportunity to go into breakout rooms and digest some of that information within a smaller group, but also maybe giving you a case study to hang this on. So I know that people are coming from a variety of sectors, so I've chosen a mainstream primary school and secondary school here, but if you are in an early learning and childcare setting or in a specialist provision, please, feel free to apply this case study to the sector or setting that you're working within. So the study is that you have just been told that a new pupil will be joining your class mid-term. The child or young person previously attended a school in the same local authority. The child or young person is autistic. What do you do to ensure the transition to your class is a smooth one? So I'll come out of the presentation and we can put this into the chat. Thank you for taking the time there. Hopefully that just gave you a little bit of a moment to digest all of that information within a smaller group and just think about it within your own context and what you might do within a very specific scenario. We chose transitions because that's one that comes up quite frequently, and when done well, it can make the world of difference to our children. And there's some really great comments and ideas there on the Jamboards around, using the circle tool to think ahead about your environment and ensuring that, it's less overwhelming in terms of displays and how the classroom's structured, about preparing the child's step by step as well, meeting with them in advance without the class to avoid them being overwhelmed and just kind of building up that familiarity, changing one thing at a time. And also thinking about linking in with parents and carers and the importance of their knowledge and awareness and insights into their child and what they benefit from in terms of approaches and using those. And yeah, that nice idea of having someone who's trusted, like a parent or a previous teacher, introduce you to the child, changing one thing at a time again, and having that consultation with home, whether it's through diaries. Loads of really great ideas. I'm just saying ones that jump out into my head, but there's everything there sounds really great. Just thinking about how you can be as prepared as possible, understanding the child, getting as many perspectives as possible, linking in with their previous school and parents, and planning ahead for them coming in. So just as it said in the DTCS key messages, making sure that any supports you put in place are anticipatory as well. So well done. It sounds like you had some really great discussions in your breakout rooms there. So I'm very aware that we only have